Welcome to the Mind and Clip Theology podcast, hosted by Miriam Peace and Amy Patton, which come out of the Canadian Journal of Theology, Mental Health, and Disability.
We both live and work on lands that have been homes and remain homes to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Neutral, and the Ojibwe Chippewa peoples and other peoples who have cared for the land.
We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land and are mindful of the need to repair broken covenants.
This podcast is an opportunity to model how faith communities can engage in theological and spiritual conversations around madness and cripness.
If you need a full transcript, you can find our videos on our YouTube channel.
We want to say before we begin that topics and conversations we are raising throughout our time together are often hard.
They are hard for mad and crip people ourselves, and hard for our families and loved ones.
So do what you need to do to take care of yourselves, your bodies, minds, and hearts.
And now, here is our episode. Welcome to this episode of the Modern Club Theology Podcast. We're happy to have a roundtable again this week. Just a few announcements as we get going. The next issue of the journal will be out in early November on Madden Cliff sexuality, so be sure to check that out. And over the coming months, we'll have interviews with the authors on the podcast. So we look forward to that.
Thanks, Miriam. Yeah, and I have one more announcement. And again, I'm so sorry. We're getting our kitchen done, so there's going to be a banging and sawing and other things while I'm talking. So I do apologize. But we have decided on the issue topic for the spring issue of our journal, and so we hope to get some submissions in from our listeners, and that the topic is going to be caregiving and care receiving. So for people, for mad and crip people and their caregivers. So we hope that that topic sounds interesting to you, and we would love to hear from you if you have any questions or like ideas that you might want to run by us, because we are taking, of course, academic articles as well as creative work. And for this issue that we're putting out in the fall, we are introducing a new section called Pedagogy and Praxis. So if you have some stuff you're doing in your faith community or in teaching or wherever you find yourself, and you want to talk about that as it relates to caregiving and care receiving, we would love to hear from you. All right, so those are the announcements. And again, I'm very happy that we're actually at the point where we are organized enough to have announcements. So it's very good. So today's topic, we had talked about wanting to do a Q&A episode, and I think we were a bit ambitious. We didn't receive any questions, crying emoji, but so what we're going to do instead is we're going to do a roundtable to talk today about pain. And so this is a topic that is going to be probably very close to the chest for a lot of us that are here today. And but I think it's a really important topic, and it's not something that we talk about very much. So we've all brought to the table some thoughts and questions that we want to sit with today. So we're so glad that you're here with us. So I wonder if there's anyone who would like to get us started on the topic of pain as it relates to disability and mental health. Any takers? Well, I wouldn't mind starting off. I don't know. I don't know if my thoughts are probably going to be controversial for some, but that's not new. I'm comfortable with that part of myself that needs to ask such questions. And again, I just want to say, as we're talking today, that there's some things we might say today that we might look back in 5 years and be like, what was I thinking? I have totally changed my mind, and I do not think that anymore. We had talked last episode about us, God bringing the theology to us that we need when we need it. So maybe we haven't encountered some things yet that will really help us to sift through some of these questions that we have. And that's okay. So I think we're all I know everyone here is open to receiving those theologies when God thinks we're ready for them. So I just want to say, don't worry. If you say something today and you're like, oh, geez, in a few years, you're like, what was I thinking? That's okay. We made space for that today. So the first thing I wanted to just talk to the group about and get your thoughts about is, okay, so a lot of people talk about what's going to happen when they quote unquote go to heaven for people with disabilities. So what will happen when we are, when we go to be with God, when we no longer are in this body? And so I know a lot of us here believe that we will be with God with our disabilities. We don't think we're going to be transformed into some sort of different beings when we die, basically. And so, and that's what I think too. But I just wonder what everybody thinks about how pain enters into that equation. So what do you all think? Do you think that you're going to be yourself plus pain, or will you be yourself minus pain after you die? I think, okay, I'll just say, because everybody's looking puzzled or thinking, I don't want to have pain. I mean, I have killer migraines that I have to go get nerve blocks and stuff for, and I don't want it anymore. So I wonder what everybody else thinks.
Okay, I'll jump in. I mean, I'm to regret this.
Please, Laura.
This is something I've thought a lot about. I think most people here and most people who have heard me speak on a podcast know that I was the mother of a very complex care child who lived with significant intellectual and physical disabilities and a number of complex medical issues until his death early in the pandemic. And so I've had to think a lot about what do I think about this? And I remember listening as a doctoral student to one of my colleagues who lives with cerebral palsy talk about their desires for the afterlife and how they imagined their embodiment. And I remember thinking, well, I can't ask Matthew, my son, what he would want. He couldn't speak. And while he communicated in ways that were meaningful to me, that's not a conversation I think we could have had. His ability to understand that would have been different than mine. So I imagine my son in the great beyond, which is what I called it in his obituary, as my son, which means he looks like the child I raised with his disabilities. But I know that his disabilities caused a significant amount of suffering for him. And that's something I know I spent this week with my class talking about the limits of the social model of disability and how we lose the body and how we can only look to society to mitigate so much, that there is an embodiment that we don't attend to. And that's something I thought a lot about with my son, because he did live with significant suffering, and pain. And it was something we struggled to manage because he didn't have the ability to describe or communicate the extent or experience of his pain to me or to the medical community. So that was something I dealt with in my doctoral work. And he also didn't have the intellectual ability maybe to do some of the meaning making that some of us do around pain and suffering. And so I wonder if that compounded his suffering. I hope that my son, wherever he might be, in whatever form he might be in the great beyond, is not suffering, that his pain and the experiences of his life that were profoundly limiting in terms of his quality of life did not accompany him to whatever comes next. But in terms of disability, the embodiment, the idea that he moved with a wheelchair or that he communicated without words, things that society maybe imposes barriers on, that part to me is with Matthew still, but I don't know what Matthew wants. So maybe Matthew wanted something different. But the suffering piece, the pain piece, I like to think that for his sake and for his mother's sake too, who lived with his suffering in vicarious ways, that it's not there. So there you go. I guess that's how I might respond.
Thank you, Laura. That was, you always have a way of putting things into greater context. So I really appreciate that. Wendy, do you have a thought brewing? I could see it.
I do. I do have a thought brewing, and it's very different from Laura's. So here we go. But maybe that's what makes these conversations interesting sometimes. I have always thought of this, not specifically the pain piece perhaps, but the whole idea of heaven and afterlife, and the we've always referred to it in my family as your eternal reward. As kind of redundant work theologically. And I don't mean that in a throwaway way, but that our visions, or my vision and hope for what is to come, is only that, and quite limited. Like, I've always sort of thought that what could possibly come is so far beyond our ability and scope to imagine that spending too much time on it was really just redundant. That there were other things so much more pressing in the here and now and in the realm of practical and lived theology to worry about, that was really one of the things that I always theologically just sort of thought was really and truly in God's hands. And so I've never really spent that much time worrying about it because there's literally nothing to be done. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess for me, when I think about like, and why I wanted to talk about this today is because I've been going through a lot of really bad migraines lately. And sometimes, I don't know, I guess I just, in like the legal, I watch YouTubers that, I don't know why, I'm kind of obsessed with YouTubers who talk about law. And so I can learn about different cases and what's going on with different trials and stuff. And there's a part, I don't know if we have it here in Canada, but in the States, they talk about their prayer for relief. So what do they need? What do they want to get to bring relief to their situation when they're asking the court for help? So I don't know. I think about my own prayers for relief, and mine is about not wanting to have pain anymore. And I hope that God hears those prayers and like is factoring that in somehow to what is going to be next for me and for everybody, I guess. Yeah. Miriam, are you going to say something? I could see your thoughts brewing now.
I was having trouble hitting the unmute button, but as someone who I don't know if I live with more pain than anyone else. I live with some pains, some constant pain, and then some greater pain when I'm due for Botox. This past time, I was a month overdue for Botox, so that was really terrible, and my body was in constant painful spasms for about 2-3 weeks. So, I don't think there is meaning to pain. I think some pain is just pain, and you want relief and comfort. I use comfort things like heat pads and medication and calling my Botox doctor for an emergency appointment. So, but as I was in pain, I was working on my chapter using Bonhoeffer, and Bonhoeffer's idea of Christ for me, Christ there for me personally was really comforting in that time when I had to, when I was keeping working and in pain, knowing Christ was in midst of that pain was helpful. I don't I don't believe so much in healing except through medication and Botox and other interventions, but knowing Jesus is with me throughout my pain has always been it's quite magnificent actually that God has love and time for me. That I don't know how to explain it, but I don't think my pain teaches me anything or is caused by anything. It's just pain. And so I don't know what's in the great after in the kingdom, but for me, I would want to live without pain, but live as who I am, as someone would see. But that's just me. I wonder your thoughts on it, Shauna. I know you've done your research is very much connected to this.
Yeah, I'm what you said about I'm just touched something in me when you were speaking there, Miriam. So thank you. It was the moment when you said how magnificent it was that Jesus is with you in these moments. And I think, yeah, it is kind of magnificent to think in some ways that we don't have to say why pain happens or give it any sort of meaning, but just to say that we are with the Spirit or with God, with our Creator, in whatever way we imagine them to be in these moments of like darkness and pain. And I think this like witness to pain, that's kind of how I think of it. I've been reading a little bit about Holy Saturday recently, and how in the depths of whatever is happening for different people, that God suffuses that place. So when Jesus died in those days before he was resurrected, that God's Spirit suffuses that place too. And it's not this like kind of like we're just waiting for the resurrection, whatever that means, but this actual sitting in that moment, not in a way where we like I'm trying to, maybe y'all can help me with this today a little bit, because it's hard to understand the difference in my mind of like, okay, well, we can't stay in the darkest moments of our lives forever, but we could if we wanted to, that there's that choice, and there's that I don't know that I'm making sense, but I think that there's something to be said for like if we want to, and for however long we want to stay in these moments of pain, not that we can choose sometimes to get out of them, but for however long we need that space, we can take it, and we know that we're there with our Creator. I don't know if that's making sense, but I also have been trying to articulate a little bit the difference in my mind between suffering and pain recently, and how that changes that conversation. Because I think so often we rush to the resurrection, we rush to thinking about eschatological things, like you were saying, Wendy, like we don't always need to go there. And so often it dismisses the pain of the moment. for this like hope of some sort of like clean white linens in the sort of resurrection future. So that was a lot of thoughts spilled out there right now, I think. But I'll maybe just leave it there and see what you all think. Because I have many more questions today than fully formed thoughts.
Thanks a lot for that, Shauna. The church that I grew up in, over Easter, over Holy Saturday, had a vigil. So from the closing of the service on Good Friday straight through until the service on Easter Monday, there was a vigil in the church, and church members would sign up for however long they were willing to stay in the church, like overnight, all night, overnight, for the whole weekend. There was someone in the church with that idea that that time that the disciples were grieving and lost needed to be attended to. And that, I know that when I was growing up, we would go as a family for, an hour and sit in the sanctuary and tend to the candles. And I never really understood it as a kid. But then as I got older and grew up, I started to realize, or comprehend is a better word, why we were there. And it's exactly that you can't just show up. Well, I mean, I guess you can technically, but just showing up on Easter Sunday and not attending to all of the hours prior, there's something lost. If that relates to what you were trying to get at all.
I wonder if we're being limited by how we define pain. As I'm listening to you reflect, the you, plural, the group, I know I was reflecting on pain and suffering with regard to my son's earthly body. So this earthly human experience of pain and suffering. And then we could go down the whole path of valorization of, which we all know I have strong feelings about as problematic. But I think what Shauna said really resonated for me. And I wonder if as we're thinking eschatologically, and I also agree with Wendy that it doesn't matter. Like, we're getting hung up on the body in some ways and an embodied experience when we don't really know what's going on with the body in the great beyond. But then, is part of, like, if I think about my experience caring for Matthew, so now moving it to sort of my pain and suffering, if we're going to use those words, for me, a lot of my grief and suffering and pain was feeling that I was embarking on this journey of caring for a son who was suffering and being very powerless in the face of that suffering, and then feeling the absence of God, feeling the absence of any kind of solidarity with a faith community or with the Creator, feeling very alone and spiritually bereft. And is that then addressed in whatever comes next? So that is there's this embodied pain, which we don't really know what's going to go on with. And then there's this spiritual pain of feeling abandoned by a community of faith or by your Creator. And is that painful void somehow addressed in whatever is next? Because now you live in the eternal presence of the divine. That is the eternal reward, to use Wendy's language. And so is pain mitigated that way because the spiritual void, this divine void, is now somehow filled? I don't know, but this huge sense of abandonment and loss may be addressed. Just throwing it out there for play, for y'all to play with.
Laura, do you mean?
Everyone's laughing on mute. So, Shauna, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that kind of, Laura, do you mean, so like there's some sort of like disconnected and disconnection that will be reattached or reconnected again? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what I'm saying. I'm clear when I teach classes that I don't actually have lots of answers. I'm just really good at asking questions, maybe. But yeah, like I think, you know, there's the embodied pain that we're talking about, that the migraines or that my son's pain or Miriam's pain, there's this embodied pain, and we don't really know what's going on with the body. But for me, my source of suffering and pain had a lot to do with an incredible sense of abandonment, of a huge, massive spiritual existential void. And part of it is vicarious suffering, and there's all of those other pieces that we could talk about. But yeah, this incredible, in the earthly life, this disconnect from creation, the creator. And is that then somehow satisfied? And therefore, in some ways, the question of pain becomes irrelevant. In ways, there's the irrelevance that Wendy speaks to, which I agree with, but also irrelevant because we now live in the presence of creation and the creator, and sort of we're bathed in it. So this existential spiritual pain is somehow mitigated. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Laura. I was thinking of some like really shitty theology that I've heard people say around pain, like I just like I don't want to hear people say certain things, and it makes me so angry. Like when people tell me like, oh, you know, God's making you into a better person through this, you know, or just like you'll become closer to God because of this pain. And it's like sometimes I don't really know what to do with those kind of statements, and maybe they kind of stick to me more than I'd like. Has anybody read any good books on pain from a theological perspective that you can think of? I was just thinking about this when you guys were talking. I was thinking about this one book that I'm using for my dissertation. Oh my God, I'm so glad you all can't see what my room looks like out of the edges of where you can see from the camera, because it's bad. I was thinking this morning, like the longer I write my dissertation, the messier this area becomes. But Kathleen Greider's book, it's called Much Madness is Divinest Sense. It's about, she looks at, so it's called Much Madness is Divinest Sense, Wisdom and Memoirs of Soul Suffering. So I'm using this book for my dissertation because my dissertation is looking at memoirs of people who self-injure. So there's this one part in her chapter called Care That Helps, where she talks about how people who want to provide care to people who are in great pain need to have an increased pain threshold themselves to be able to sit with people who are in a lot of pain and also like witness that kind of pain. Maybe I'll just like read this. Is it okay? This like I honestly cried when I read this the first time. Probably make me cry now too. Okay, so this is on page 239 of the book. Okay, so this is, like I said, it's from the chapter Care That Helps. So she's talking about what kind of care will help people who are in soul suffering. Sitting down together with mutual respect and shared vulnerability to mystery and misery is where we begin. After that, though, helpful care will require an even higher pain threshold. It's so much easier to talk about pain tolerance than to have it when wounds are raw, pain excruciating, and care suspect. Another story told by Martha Manning makes more visceral the challenge of care in the face of excruciating pain. 6 months after Manning's hospitalization for depression, she is trying to resume her counseling practice. A woman is referred to Martha by an oncologist who says the woman is depressed. And this is an excerpt from the book. She fumes at me for giving such lousy directions and makes it clear that seeing me is not her idea and that she has no intention of returning. Sometimes in situations like these, I have the good sense to keep my mouth shut long enough for people to tell me their real stories. In the silence, her anger gives way quickly to tears. She tells me about her mastectomy and the recurrence of her breast cancer. The cancer is eating her up from the inside out, resulting in ulcerations all over her chest. She wrestles with words that could possibly convey her suffering. As she tries to talk to me, deep, wrenching sobs drown out the words. Her cries come from a place in us where hell resides. Sometimes, I admit to her, hell has no words. Her sobbing quiets, her breathing deepens. She looks straight at me and begins to unbutton her blouse. I want to stop her and say, "Oh no, I'm not that kind of doctor," but I realize she knows that already. She unbuttons her blouse and holds it open. She is wearing nothing underneath. What she shows me has no words. Her skin is ravaged with scars and huge sores. Never have I seen anything so horrible, so painful. She holds her blouse open and looks me in the eye with a mixture of pain and defiance. She defies me to what? Flinch, turn away, feel pity, say something totally inept? I don't know. All I know is that I need to stare her right back in the eye and stop fighting so hard to keep my own eyes from filling up. She tells me that she can't even show her husband and daughter the ravages of her cancer. And acknowledging the torment of her isolation, I understand what I have to do with her for the rest of this hour. I have to sit with her blouse open and her awful wounds, both visceral and psychic. I have to sit with her in her pain. The quiet between us is punctuated by brief exchanges about her life, but it is clear she doesn't really want my words. She wants my presence. When the hour is up, she buttons her blouse. She straightens herself up, thanks me, and shakes my hand. She tells me that she doesn't think she'll be back and adds, "I wish you were a priest." I tell her that sometimes I wish that too. She says goodbye and leaves the way she came, bitching about my directions. And so I just really loved reading this part of the book because it really as she goes on in the chapter, Grider talks about how like we need to be able to like sit with people and have like an increased pain tolerance. We can't have shitty stuff that we say to people like, "Oh, God is teaching you something through this," or "Oh, God heals all wounds," or whatever crap platitudes we can spit out at people. Yeah, so I highly recommend this book for anyone who's looking for something good to read about pain.
Can you share the title and author again, please and thank you?
Yeah, sure. It's Kathleen Grider. Kathleen J. Grider. So that's Greider. And it's called Much Madness is Divinest Sense, Wisdom in Memoirs of Soul Suffering. And it's such a good book. I read it for my exams, actually, for my PhD exams. But she pulls together a lot of like kind of seminal mental illness memoirs. And also there's some other ones that sort of touch on other things, like I just read about cancer and stuff. But it helps. I really like this book because she talks about how religion can heal, how spirituality can heal, and also care that helps. But she also like doesn't shy away from talking about the care that harms, when and what kind of care people need who are suffering. I wonder if anybody else has did you bring a question with you or a wondering today when you heard about the topic we were going to be discussing? Sorry, that's my cat. He's meowing. She's very hungry, even though I did just feed her.
Maybe while we're thinking of our questions, I just wanted to thank you, Amy, for reading that out. As I mentioned last time, for most of my adult life, I've worked at the intersection of poverty, homelessness, addiction, and often, we had very kind of like practical, quote unquote, things that we would do, like food and referrals to different treatment facilities, et cetera, et cetera. But honestly, in the last couple of years, we've moved most of our work to like, we've realized how lonely people are and how they don't have someone to witness their pain. And so most of our work in the last couple of years has really just been like hours going out for coffee or going for a walk. One of my colleagues has a trained therapy dog, and he was an official volunteer at the organization and would come in, and they would just like, people would come in and just sit with the dog on the couch or go for a walk. And I think like having someone to witness your pain when you're feeling it is so rare. Someone to just stare at your open blouse, and not look away, but maybe wince with you in those moments where you're wincing at it too. And I've said to people before, like, as they are speaking or we're just sitting and I'm crying too, and just to say like, I don't know what to say to this, and we're here together, to just actually like be together is this very, very, and like really looking at each other is just so sacred or holy moment. And I think it's something that, yeah, we just need more of it. There's for all of us. And in those moments too, I felt like these are moments of connection that heal us in some ways, in the sense of like, we don't feel as alone in our pain. For me too. And it's those moments as well healed me from the heartbreak of other moments like that. It's interesting how these human connections kind of not that surprisingly are mutual and work both ways, like it's just, yeah, I'll stop there. But that's what I was thinking about while you read, Amy. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shauna. I think it takes definitely it takes courage and intention to sort of bear witness to that kind of pain that we were just discussing. Yeah.
I know that was the question that I was bringing with me today was, how do we journey with people in pain, and why do we struggle so openly with it? At times, I became, during my doctoral work, became really interested in the work of Arthur Frank, who writes about illness narratives and the chaos narrative, because that was the narrative that most resonated with me. And Frank talks about our need to control chaos, or to be able to influence it. And for people who are living in chaos, how isolating it can be when people want to explain away your chaos or make sense theologically or through theodicies with chaos, and how bad we are at sometimes just existing within the chaos. And as Shauna said, honoring the chaos and honoring the person living in chaos, and knowing that at times we can influence chaos, and in those cases we are called to do so. And we as a community of faith need to think about how we should be doing that. But there are times that we can't. And then the power of being in chaos with someone, of being in the moment of pain and just acknowledging it, and ensuring that they're not alone, and also bearing witness and hearing the story with the depth of pain. And that was the question. And again, I don't really feel I have a good answer, other than it's something that our particular Western society really struggles with, and we feel we need to control chaos. I think about it a lot with regard to the medical model, and we need to manage it and control it or erase it. And therefore, if we can't talk about it. We can't be in the presence of it. And how do we challenge that and do a better job of creating communities that journey with people in pain? Again, my question, not sure I have great answers.
As you all were talking, I was thinking about, times in my life where I have found God was more absent to me. And that was during my deep depression and suicidal ideation. And I remember being in hospital, and they had changed my meds because they were trying to figure out what medication would work on me. And this particular med made me so angry, like the angriest I've ever been in my life. And I remember telling my mom not to come. I didn't want her near the hospital near me. But she came. She came into that chaos everyday thing, and then they quickly changed my med so I wasn't as angry anymore. But that being with immense of that chaos and showing up even when someone says they don't want you here. Now that can get into that can get into questions of self-advocacy, I guess. But for showing up, even though it was annoying at the time, it was important to me. Even though she couldn't do anything to make me less angry. I don't know where I'm going with that, but that's just the story that came up for me. So living in chaos.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Miriam. I was put on a medication for my migraines that, and one of the side effects was becoming angry. Like, it literally says on it, this will make you angry. And I was like, I won't be angry. And it and it did, it made me angry. So I went off after like a week. That's probably all I could take, because yeah, so I know what you mean. It's crazy how bad the side effects can be sometimes. Yeah. Well, I'm aware of time, so we're sort of drawing towards the end of the hour. I'm wondering if anybody has any sort of last thoughts, or even resource sharing you might want to share with our listeners about pain.
Shauna, what is MacGregor's book written at the foot of the cross? Yeah, the one on Holy Saturday. That's a good one.
Yeah, also I was thinking of an edited series of essays called Feminist Trauma Theologies. It's edited by Katie Cross and Karen O'Donnell, and they just came out with a second edited set on more intersectional voices that just came out, called Bearing Witness, I think, which is, I haven't read it yet, but I'm really looking forward. And then the other thinker and writer that has kind of come to mind through this conversation is Catherine Keller, a process theologian, and her Tahomic theology, Theology of Chaos, I found really helpful for some of these questions, particularly her book on the mystery and fear of the deep, or face of the deep. I can't remember which one it is, but I was thinking of her words.
Well, Miriam and I really appreciate all the stories that have been shared today. They're very precious, and we may not have all the answers on this podcast. Well, we don't have answers on this podcast, but at least we can sit and talk about our questions. And yeah. So thank you so much for being here, everyone. And thanks to our listeners, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.